Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about the Ultimates issue 19 by Dennis Camp, Juan Frigeri and Federico Blee. All-out war rages across Earth 6160 as the Maker's City very briefly opened before closing again, trapping Iron Lad, Spider-Man, Doom and America Chavez inside. Outside the dome though, the Triskelion has been destroyed, the debris raining down on Earth as Janet Van Dyne reveals that her and Hank Pym have taken up the liberation of the East Coast, helping Captain America and Hawkeye against Captain Britain's army never-ending, a force made up of Britain's cultural and folklore heroes like giants, fairies, goblins, and orcs. So if it isn't very obvious, the correct reading order for this whole endgame thing, and the way I'll be putting out these videos, is that we'll have Ultimate Endgame 1 first, and this one next, and so far it works well. I think that's probably how these books are going to go, where we have the endgame issue, then we have the actual Ultimates ongoing issue. The issue is also covering things I actually wanted to see, like the boots on the ground fighting, since I felt like we didn't get enough of that beforehand, and I was hoping we would catch up with some of these other heroes that weren't just the focus of the main endgame story. So I'm glad we're not catching up with Doom and Iron Lad on every single issue, and we're having a good variety of different characters. Janet explains how during the battle last week, Captain America killed King Arthur, and since then, Captain Britain refuses to leave Camelot, mostly because he's a coward and wants his minions to do all the dirty work. Janet knows that during the whole month of non-stop fighting they've been having, they have all made sacrifices, with some making the ultimate one as some of the Avengers Project heroes are killed during the battle. But she also knows that some of them sacrifice in less obvious ways. Wasp kills a giant by flying into its ear and growing large, exploding the monster from within. So in case you forgot, we learned quite a while ago, I think it was in the 1 year in special, that Wasp is actually working for Hand and for Nick Fury, spying on the Ultimates for the villains. Since finding that out, bugger all has actually happened on that plot front, and while we are about to get into it in this issue, I don't know why it didn't happen sooner, since Janet was outed as a spy to us like a year and a half ago, and we've only seen very little bits and pieces here and there of her actually doing double agent sort of work. It's all been mostly implied work. We've had nothing up until right now focusing on that, which I think is probably a bit of a problem, being the universe is ending in a couple of months. As they fight, the Triskelion is destroyed, taking the Ultimates network offline, shocking all of the heroes. Captain America knows it doesn't change anything and they need to keep fighting while also starting a search and rescue mission for those on board the station. Wasp tells him that there's no teleporter anymore with the Triskelion destroyed, so Steve wants her and Hank to go on foot, finding it lucky that they both can grow in size and take bigger strides than most. During the mission, Janet begins to think how she never wanted to get married, thinking of her childhood where she saw how marriage had ravaged her mother's life, and she wanted none of that and wanted more for life, having big dreams of becoming a fashion designer. But then at one of her father's corporate balls, she met Hank Pym, who her father knows will one day use his great mind in one of his companies to revolutionize mass technology. This is the sort of stuff we should have been getting like 7 or 8 issues ago in the Ultimates, just a lot sooner than right here at the end of everything, since you've got to find these characters compelling and care for their plight as they go on. You've got to, have a connection to them, but it feels like it's doing everything backwards, where we're getting all of this stuff right here at the end, and it just makes me feel kind of nothing for Janet and Hank's plight and everything. It started off great, like how Camp introduced them and like made them sort of like the normal people in this world full of gods and time traveling men and all that sort of stuff. These two people who were just normal everyday people was interesting, and then nothing really ever came of it. That's not me saying that this isn't good stuff. This is very good stuff. This is great character work stuff. It's just happening at the wrong time. Hank and Janet get to know each other and eventually start dating, and we actually get a great insight into Hank as a person before the Maker ruined his life. Hank is prone to some sort of mood swings, his genius often crossing into mania, and he can't quite get his ideas across to people. But then he would also get very lazy and depressed and not want to get out of bed and not talk to Janet and kind of yell at her. But then there's also days where he and Janet would just stay up all night talking about their feelings and his work on a new theory of matter. And then he'd also talk about Janet's new clothing designs and actually show her attention and actually be interested in what she is doing, something that Janet notes is something she's never had before in her life, since people often saw her as like a trophy to obtain or very much like an item to have. She's never experienced someone who actually gave a shit about her. And in that regard, I really like what Camp captures about Janet and Hank. It feels like a very realistic depiction of a relationship, complete with all the ups and downs and all of the frayed edges. No relationship is utterly perfect. As someone who just recently became engaged, I've experienced all of these things at some point or another, and it's great seeing it shown in a realistic way on the page. Janet eventually realizes she is in love with Hank, and the first time she thought that was also the day that Hank got into his accident that the Maker orchestrated that claimed his intellect. This is all fantastic character work. It just is happening again, as I said before, at the very wrong time, and this should have been happening over a bunch of issues as the B-plot, as we see Janet and Hank's life and how joining the Ultimates changed their lives. In the present, Hank and Janet make it to the Triskelion crash site, and Hank doesn't think that anyone could have survived the wreckage, knowing full well that She-Hulk was up on that station as well. They soon find a survivor of the Fantastic Force, and Janet tries to help the severely burned and wounded woman, but she dies in her arms. This death makes Janet realize that this is all her fault, thanks to being a double agent for Hand and Nick Fury. Her realization is put on hold as Hand soon arrives in their helicarrier, as thousands of miles away, Hand agents go and check a crater in a forest, thinking that it's a waste of time since no one could have actually survived that fall from space. They're dead wrong, as a very, very angry She-Hulk crawls her way out of the crater, intent on murdering the Hand agents. Janet meanwhile thinks again about Hank and his accident, as the crash took Hank's memory, making him not recognize who Janet is and the history they share. Janet learns that if Hank would think too hard, like the type of thinking he would need to do to continue his scientific work, he would get terrible, terrible headaches, and because of this, Janet's father fires Hank from his company, citing how the man is no use to him anymore or his daughter. Janet tries to explain to her father that she loves Hank, but he doesn't care, calling Hank dead weight. The coldness of these corpo leaders of this Ultimate world is ever shocking. We've seen it across this entire book and across Ultimate Invasion and the original Hickman Ultimate series, where he kind of showed us that thanks to the Maker, the corporations obviously run this world, and they are all just so uncaring, emotionless, and just all care about the bottom line. And I like that Janet gets to experience that firsthand with her own father, who is one of these people. And it's a great way to set up that rebellious streak that eventually will lead her and Hank to break away and eventually join the Ultimates. Again though, and I'm very sorry if I sound like a broken record, but had this happened 9-10 issues earlier, it would have hit a bit more harder and be a bit more satisfying of a character arc developing. Janet refuses to leave Hank's side, knowing that this wasn't the man she fell in love with, but during his recovery, Hank asks Janet if she is okay, something Janet, having lived with her cold and distant father and just seen as a trophy to all the high-ranking corporate elite, never had been asked that ever, so how could she walk away from someone who actually genuinely cared for her? A few weeks later, Janet and Hank got married at the courthouse with a few of their friends being witnesses and without Janet's parents' blessing. Their new lives begin, and Janet was cut off from her parents' money, so she had to get a job as a waitress, while Hank got a cleaning job at the university he used to teach at. Eventually though, Hank's distant uncle dies and bequeathed him a van and a bug-killing equipment, so they went into business as exterminators. While Janet was happy with the life they had made together, she often stayed up at night imagining bigger lives for them, one that died when Hank was in his crash. Eventually though, Hand approached Janet and offered her a life that she could want, as back in the present, Ant-Man and the Wasp battle the onslaught of Hand agents descending from the helicarrier. Hand focus on Ant-Man, and Janet tries to get them to stop, having to quickly take out a bunch of them before they can kill Hank, who thinks that she's amazing at what she does. Suddenly, Hank is hit by the lightning gun from Helicarrier, rapidly shrinking down to normal size as Janet asks the hand to stop. The agent in charge knows that the director wants anything with powers dead, so Janet calls in a code phrase, telling the agents that they work for Fury, which confuses the injured Hank. While Janet and Hank reckon with Janet's choices, the enraged She-Hulk kills the hand agents sent after her, thanking them for helping her reach this new level of anger she never knew she had. Interestingly though, She-Hulk isn't just angry at Hand, she's also angry at Iron Lad, finding it foolish to ever believe that a boy in a homemade armor could ever save her home, and she shouldn't have put Iron Lad's priorities above her own people. Powering up, She-Hulk leaps into the sky, knowing that she had hoped to take her home with an army, but she'll do it all by herself. So this is yet another plotline that would have been so much more weighty had it happened a lot sooner, and we had a whole arc devoted to the liberation of She-Hulk's island nation. I'm sure there probably were plans for that to happen until the universe got cut short. But even with them being cut short, this should have happened a lot sooner, especially because She-Hulk and her island and Iron Lad's promise to help them happened like really early on in the book's lifespan. So why did this plot just kind of get jettisoned all the way to the back and we not focus on that? That could have been such a really damn good early Ultimates win for the team. Like that could have been like their first spark of rebellion in this world. It would have been really cool to see that. We probably are going to get something in the next couple of issues, but because it's happening so close to the end of the story, it feels like we're only entering Act 2 of that story, and then it's just going to end, so it's not going to be a very satisfying ending, at least I don't think it will be. As She-Hulk goes on her one-woman war against Banner and AIM, Janet remembers how after being initially recruited by Hand, she spent 4 nights a week training, with Hank not even aware of what she had been really up to. Janet hated lying to Hank and wanted to bring him in on their deal, but the handler she reports to knows that Hank is too soft and emotional for this, and if he really knew how the world worked, it would eat him up on the inside. Janet's reasonings for why she did this is something that initially really intrigued me about her turn, since was she protecting Hank? Did she have a bit of information that the other Ultimates did not have about the world? Was she actually just a plain old villain? And I'm glad to know that it was about protecting Hank and trying to save her and him from like all of this terribleness that was happening. I'm glad that was the reasoning and she didn't turn into being like a full villain or something like that, was doing it for like selfish reasons for herself. Janet continues her training and eventually she begins to think that she has found a purpose and her life feels like it was getting bigger and bigger. She asks her handler if one day she can go on a mission, but the handler knows that she needs to stay clean since she can't have a criminal record, and soon she learns why as Tony Stark approaches her and Hank with a mission, allowing her to see the vision for what is happening. The handler asks if Janet knows what's happening since they have been putting this together for a very long time and it's all been planned out. In the present, Janet and Hank are brought before Nick Fury, who congratulates Janet on a mission well done, further confusing Hank. Nick reveals that Janet did this all to protect Hank, messing around with the man as he points out the large scar on his face from his car crash, knowing full well where it came from, but he just wanted to gloat about it a little bit. All the new revelations and information prove a bit too much for Hank's still damaged brain, and one of his headaches racks his mind, causing him to slur his words and scream in pain. I feel like the headaches thing should have been a running thing throughout this entire book, since he never actually got any of them really until now. Like, Hank was in very stressful situations before this and never did this sort of thing. He just got really scared, which I really put down to him being so out of his depth as just the most normal guy amongst these godlike superheroes. He was way in over his head. Had the book continued, I could totally see a very Fantastic Voyage type storyline where maybe they try and fix Hank. They shrink down and travel into his brain to try and fix his brain somehow, and they got to battle whatever the maker was doing to him or something, and it makes Hank back to the normal Hank we know and love. And I could see something like that happening, and you could have set that story up by having these headaches dotted throughout the issues, being sort of the genesis of that. It's like, oh, why is he having these headaches? Okay, so we set up that he gets them from the accident. Well, maybe we can go and fix this accident and make it so that Hank is just a normal healthy very smart guy again. There's like a story there, and I'm surprised it never went in that direction. Maybe it was going to, and it just got cut short. Nick doesn't think that Hank is taking the news of Janet's betrayal very well, not thinking that he will keep the secret very long, and so he needs to be dealt with as he's a liability. Janet knows that he'll be fine, but she can't do this anymore, but Nick doesn't care, planning on sending Janet back out into the field and keeping Hank as their guest to make sure that Janet does what he needs her to do. Hank is able to ask Janet why she did this, and all Janet will say is that she had a vision. But it wasn't Tony's vision, it was something else. Hank, despite the pain in his mind, asks if she works for Nick Fury, and Nick knows that she does, and suddenly the LMD of Nick goes dead as his metal brain is pulled from its head by the Vision, like the actual Vision, who says that Janet works for them. Okay, so what the fuck is this? The Vision is now in the book as an ultimate, and seemingly Janet was never working for Nick, but was actually working for the Vision and was actually double-crossing the Hand and infiltrating the Hand to find out what they were doing, but that was also infiltrating the Ultimates as well. This is like a crazy reveal, to not just because we have no hints whatsoever that Janet was working against Nick. It was very clear that she was working for Nick Fury. They made that very clear. But how are you going to now also reveal that, oh, the Vision is now in this universe just as the universe ends? Like, how does that even work? We never had Ultron. How does this Vision come about? Like, so many questions. I'm sure Dennis Camp has some great ideas for what the answers to these questions are, but it would have hit so much better had it been 8 or 9 issues ago. The Ultimates issue 19 was a real mixed bag for me, and it actually has nothing to do with how the story is written. It's actually written very competently and very compellingly. It's done extremely well, and getting to focus on Janet and Hank, the two most normal members of the Ultimates, is great. What I do not like about it is the timing. We are doing all of this great character work, big reveals like the Vision showing up right as the universe is wrapping up, which does a lot to take the steam out of them for me, since I'm beginning to worry if anything meaningful will come of these plots, or they'll just end up half completed and just left unfinished. I am going to give this issue a 6.5 out of 10.